There are places in this world where silence holds memories, where the stones remember blood, and the forests echo with whispers that never end. Deep in the Carpathian Mountains, where the mist clings to the trees like the breath of the forgotten, there once lived a man who became myth. A prince whose throne was carved from terror and legend, Vlad III of Wallachia. To his enemies, he was a monster. To his people, a necessary demon. To history, a puzzle composed of cruelty, power, and death. But to the world, he would be remembered by a single name: Vlad the Impaler. He was born into a world that fed on betrayal. The year was 1431, and the town of Sighisoara, nestled in the Kingdom of Hungary, would mark the arrival of a child forged in fire. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was a member of the Order of the Dragon, a secretive Christian chivalric order sworn to defend the cross against the encroaching Ottoman Empire. But the dragon, once a symbol of divine fury, cast long shadows. Power in these lands was fragile. Alliances were knives disguised as handshakes, and loyalty was a coin bought and spent often. Young Vlad was not born into innocence. He was born into strategy, into danger. His father's throne in Wallachia was not secure, and enemies waited at every turn. The boy's earliest memories were likely not of lullabies, but of whispers, names of men who might one day slit his throat in sleep, or seize him as ransom, or poison the cup passed at dinner. And then, at the age of 11, the boy prince was taken. In 1442, in a calculated diplomatic maneuver, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were handed over to the Ottoman Sultan Murad II as political hostages. They were not treated as slaves, but neither were they free. They were pawns, bargaining chips in a game played between empires. Yet even as a boy, Vlad observed, absorbed. Where others might have broken, he studied. He watched how the Ottomans ruled, how their power was not just military but theatrical. Heads mounted on walls, impalements in public square. Power was not just something to be held, it was something to be shown. A lesson the boy would learn too well. The years passed. In the Ottoman court, Vlad learned languages, warfare, and the art of diplomacy masked in smiles. But rage smoldered beneath his skin. He hated the Sultan, he hated the empire, and perhaps more than anything, he hated the helplessness of captivity. Radu, his brother, became soft in the Sultan's shadow, seduced by the culture and luxuries. But Vlad became iron. When he was finally released, a young man now, he did not return as a lost son. He returned like a blade. In 1448, he seized the Wallachian throne, briefly, only to be ousted weeks later. His exile was not retreat. It was sharpening. For years he plotted, watched, waited. And in 1456, when he reclaimed his throne again, it was not as a boy prince. It was as a man, reborn, in vengeance. The land he returned to was broken. Wallachia, sandwiched between the hungry jaws of Hungary and the expanding Ottomans, had been ravaged by internal strife, lawlessness, and betrayal. Nobles were power-hungry, and the people lived in fear not of foreigners, but of each other. It was into this chaos that Vlad brought order, an order built on fear, blood, and spectacle. His reign began not with decrees, but with executions. The boy who once watched heads rot on Ottoman spikes began to craft his own theater of power. His enemies didn't vanish. They were displayed. In his first years, Vlad is said to have impaled thousands. Nobles who plotted against him, criminals, rival claimants, even lazy peasants, all were subject to the state. And impalement, in Vlad's hands, was not merely punishment, it was performance. A stake would be sharpened, sometimes oiled. The victim was stripped, then hoisted. The point would be inserted, sometimes through the abdomen, sometimes through more intimate means. Slowly, gravity would pull the body down, the stake emerging through the shoulder, the chest, or the mouth, depending on angle and time. It was not quick. It could take hours, days. Birds would come, flies, and all the while the message would spread. This is the cost of disloyalty. This is what a prince does when he is done being powerless. But Vlad was not mad, not in the clinical sense. He was strategic. He understood terror as a tool. He began to rebuild the roads, enforce harsh laws, and stamp out banditry. Wallachia, once overrun with crime, became eerily safe, not because the people loved their prince, but because they feared him more than death itself. Merchants could travel unmolested. Peasants left coins in open fields and returned to find them untouched. Justice reigned, blind, brutal, and absolute. Yet, the stories that survive are not just of fear. They are of obsession, of spectacle. Intai. One tale speaks of a golden cup placed at a public fountain. No guards were assigned to it, and yet no one dared steal it. It stayed there, day after day, shining untouched. Another legend tells of Vlad inviting hundreds of beggars to a feast, only to lock the doors and burn the hall, proclaiming that he was solving poverty. These stories, real or exaggerated, did not merely frighten, they enthralled. They made him larger than life. They made him myth. From Kadkans. But perhaps the most chilling stories are of his banquets. They say that Vlad did not merely kill. He observed. He hosted dinners near impalement sites. He dined among the dead. Imagine it. A long table set in a courtyard where dozens, perhaps hundreds, of impaled victims sway gently in the breeze. Their moans, if they still breathe. Their silence, if they don't. The scent of roasted meat mingling with the stench of decay. Vlad, seated in fine clothes, raising a goblet as blood drips from the stakes behind him. Courtiers eating nervously, laughing too loud, unsure whether the prince's smile is amusement or a warning. To Vlad, the dead were more than corpses. They were stage props, proof. He did not simply want to be obeyed. He wanted to be remembered. Every stake was a punctuation mark in a message written in flesh, and the world did remember. Power, once seized, demands constant feeding. In the shadowlands of medieval Europe, a prince could not afford to rest. Enemies were never idle. They regrouped, they whispered, they watched. For Vlad III, now firmly on the throne, the threats came from every direction. To the south, the vast Ottoman Empire, a juggernaut hungry for expansion, whose fingers already gripped much of the Balkans. To the west, the Kingdom of Hungary, nominal allies, but in truth, suspicious and often resentful of Vlad's independence. And within his own borders, the old boyars, nobles who remembered a time when Wallachia's rulers answered to them, not the other way around. But Vlad had no intention of answering to anyone. He ruled by fear and by spectacle. His justice was swift, theatrical, and unforgettable. Once, when envoys from the Ottoman Empire came to his court and refused to remove their turbans, citing religious custom, Vlad commended their piety and ordered the turbans nailed to their skulls permanently. He didn't need armies to send messages. His methods were far more efficient. Word of mouth was his true courier. The traveler who passed through Wallachia and lived would carry tales more effective than 1,000 proclamations. And then came the year 1426, the year of the forest. The Ottomans, under Sultan Mehmed II, the same Mehmed who had taken Constantinople just a decade earlier, began to pressure Vlad. Tribute payments were demanded, obedience expected. Vlad, ever the tactician, appeared to comply, but in secret he prepared for war. He knew he could not defeat the Ottomans in open battle. Their numbers were overwhelming, their power legendary. But power has a weakness. It expects submission. Vlad gave it defiance. That winter, in a night raid so daring it bordered on madness, Vlad crossed the Danube and attacked Ottoman camps with fire and sword. Thousands were killed, supply lines were burned, chaos was sown, and then, when the retaliation came, a massive army, tens of thousands strong, marching into Wallachia, Vlad greeted it with silence. They advanced through a deserted countryside. Villages stood empty. Wells were poisoned, crops burned. And then, as they neared the capital of Targovista, they saw it. A forest, but not of trees. Stakes. Miles of them. Some estimates say 20,000 bodies impaled. Criminals, traitors, enemy soldiers, perhaps even peasants, all mounted like grotesque trees in full bloom. The stench was suffocating. The sight, indescribable. The Ottoman soldiers faltered. Even seasoned veterans, men who had marched through war and plague, recoiled. This was not war. This was madness made into method. And at the center of that forest, it is said, sat Vlad, calm, composed, watching them break without ever drawing a blade. This was how he ruled. Not with armies, with theater. But even the most terrifying legends cannot protect a man forever. Power attracts betrayal. And Vlad's greatest weakness was always close to home, his own brother. Radu, once the soft boy raised in the Ottoman court, had risen in favor with the Sultan. Now the Ottomans put forward Radu as a replacement, a more cooperative prince. And many of Wallachia's nobles, exhausted by fear, tempted by promises, began to shift their loyalty. Vlad's court fractured, his allies dwindled, and finally outnumbered and outmaneuvered, Vlad fled. He sought asylum in Hungary, believing the Christian king, Matthias Corvinus, would aid him. But even faith is fragile in politics. Instead of help, Vlad found chains. He was arrested, imprisoned in Hungary for over a decade. The reasons were many. Politics, propaganda, and forged letters that painted him as a traitor to Christendom. The truth was irrelevant. The myth of the Impaler was already so large that even his allies feared the shadow he cast. Yet even in chains, Vlad endured. He was not broken. He waited, watched, plotted, and time, as always, turned. The political tides shifted. The Ottomans pressed harder against Christian borders, and suddenly, the monster once feared became useful. Vlad was released. His name was invoked once more, not as a demon, but as a weapon. In 1476, he returned to Wallachia once again. This time, it was not glory that awaited him. It was fate. The roads were colder now. The land had changed. Wallachia, once scorched by his fury, now felt unfamiliar, like a kingdom that had tried to forget him and failed. The trees seemed older, the people quieter. The ground still drank blood, but it no longer remembered whose. It was 1476. Vlad III, now in his mid-40s, returned not as a conqueror, but as a revenant. He had spent over a decade in Hungarian captivity, sharpening the only weapon left to him: his name. He was no longer just a man. He was a myth reanimated. Half hero, half specter. Even those who hated him whispered his return with a mixture of dread and awe. The Ottomans had placed his brother Radu on the Wallachian throne. Radu the Handsome, they called him. Handsome, pliant, soft. A prince fit for diplomacy, not war. But Radu was dying, worn thin by disease or poison. History is unclear. His death created a vacuum, and Vlad stepped back into it like a ghost slipping into an old skin. But the world had moved on. Vlad's allies were fewer now. The boyars he had terrorized had children and grandchildren who remembered too well the smell of burning halls and the forests of corpses. The peasants were tired. the nobles suspicious, the church was divided, and the Ottomans, ever watchful, prepared to snuff him out once and for all. Still, he was made voivode again, Prince of Wallachia, for a third time, a brief, flickering return. Like a storm cloud gathering above dry fields dark and silent before the downpour, he ruled for only a matter of weeks. Days, some say. But he ruled as only Vlad could, decisively, ruthlessly, and with purpose. And then he vanished. No one knows exactly how Vlad died, but legends, oh legends, remain. One tale says he rode out with a small force to face an invading Ottoman column. The battle was brief, brutal, and bloody. Amid the chaos, Vlad was mistaken by his own troops for an enemy, his armor resembling that of a Turk. He was struck down by friendly hands, his body left crumpled on the frozen ground, nameless and still. Another story claims it was assassination, that boyars who had long awaited revenge finally found it. That one whispered word, one misplaced moment of trust, ended the reign of terror with a blade in the dark. A third tale, the most poetic, says Vlad died laughing, defiant to the end, standing alone on a field soaked with blood, surrounded and smiling, daring the enemy to approach. In all accounts, what followed was macabre poetry. His head was cut off. The Ottomans, needing proof of death, took the severed head and preserved it in honey, a gruesome preservation meant to keep the features intact during transport. It was carried across the empire to Constantinople, paraded like a trophy through the city, a gift to Sultan Mehmed II. It was mounted on a spike, just like the thousands Vlad had impaled. The prince who had turned death into a language was now fluent in his own dialect. The body, if it was ever recovered, vanished. Some say it was buried in a monastery at Snagov Island, beneath the cold stones of a chapel now crumbling. Others say it was never found at all, that his enemies feared what his grave might become, a shrine, a symbol, a seed for rebellion. Better to erase him. But men like Vlad cannot be erased. He lives in contradictions. A tyrant who saved his people, a Christian prince who learned cruelty in a Muslim court, a hero and a monster, a national savior and an imperial warning. His story is told in breathless tones around Romanian firesides and in shadowed classrooms across Europe. Even the fictional Dracula, born centuries later, drinks from the cup Vlad filled, though it holds not blood, but memory. He ruled for less than 7 years total, scattered across 3 fractured reigns, yet his legacy spans centuries. Why? Because Vlad understood something timeless. He understood that fear outlives flesh, that spectacle burns brighter than virtue, that legends are not carved in stone, but in what people are too afraid to forget. And so, he dined among the dead, not out of madness, but out of method. Not because he lacked humanity, but because he saw how fragile it was, how easily it could be taken, broken, rearranged into obedience. He did not invent cruelty. He refined it. He shaped it into architecture, into law, into silence. Even now, in quiet places, his name lingers. In the forests, in ruined keeps, in stories not told to children, not because he was evil, but because he worked.